our production cost report. However, it has missing amounts. So they gave us a partial production cost report and they're asking us to figure out all the blanks. And in the textbook, you can see that it's mostly a whole bunch of blanks. I went ahead and transferred all that information into our Excel sheet so that we could just reference this rather than going back and forth between the two. And so, complete the missing amounts in the following production report. Materials are added at the beginning of the process. Conversion costs are incurred evenly. The ending inventory is 60% complete, and the company uses the weighted average method. And so we'll just go ahead and start plugging in information wherever we can, and in some places we might have to skip ahead so that we can work backwards or whatever. We'll just figure it out. So we have our production cost report for the finishing department. Of course, we're starting with the units. And so units to account for, we have beginning WIP 500, started in production 22,000. And so first, what are the total units to account for? That's A. And that's just the sum of the two. So 2,700 units to account for. And now that we know that, we can go ahead and come down and plug in C, because if you remember, the total units to account for has to equal the total units accounted for. So we'll plug in C with 2,700. And now that we have that filled in, that allows us to complete B, the completed and transferred out. Because if we know 2,700 have to be accounted for, and there's 500 in our ending WIP, that means there must have been 2,200 completed and transferred out, or the difference, the 2,700 minus the 500 for 2,200. Okay, so now we have our first column completed, and now we can start applying some of this information across our rows, because if it was completed and transferred out, that means it was 100%, the costs were, they're 100% complete. So that means D and G, the equivalent units for direct materials and for conversion, as far as completed and transferred out, will be equal to that same 2,200 whole units. Now we need to come down to our ending WIP. So of these 500 units, what percent is complete for direct materials and for conversion? And if we come back up, materials were added at the beginning of the process, conversion costs are incurred evenly, and the ending inventory is 60% complete. So that means, in terms of equivalent units, these 500 units are 100% complete. So really just times 1 for direct materials. As far as conversion, these 500 units are 60% complete for conversion, so 300. And now we can use just add these two rows together to get the total units accounted for. So now we've completed the units section of our production cost report, and we need to come down to the cost section. And so costs to account for our beginning WIP is here. We have direct materials for 1,200. J, conversion is unknown. Total cost of 2,140. So if we have total cost and we have direct materials, we can subtract out the total cost minus the direct materials, and we know that 940 of those materials to account for must belong to conversion. Then they gave us costs added during the period, and they gave us materials and conversion. We just need to add those two together to get the total costs. And we can do some double checking here because they gave us total cost to account for. So here on the side in L30, I'm going to add together costs added during the period and total cost beginning WIP, and we get that same 22,480 which was given to us. And so that's just a double check that confirms that we're doing this correctly. So for L, total cost to account for, we can just add together costs added during the period and the beginning WIP for 13,230. Again, we could do another double check that this is adding up across the row, and we get 22,480, which is our K30, so that's a good sign. Now we need to divide by the total equivalent units of production, and that is just pulled down from our first table. So we'll say equals total units accounted for. And same thing for conversion. And now our cost per equivalent unit is going to be the total cost divided by the equivalent units. So we'll say equals our 13,230 divided by our 2,700. And let's change this so that we can see the decimals. And I'm going to go ahead and pull or drag that formula across because it's the same for both of them. And so we have 490 cost per equivalent unit for direct materials and 370 cost per equivalent unit for conversion. Excuse me, and now it's asking us to do the costs accounted for. And so we're just now going to be multiplying. We're going to come back up into units. So completed and transferred out, 22,000 units times 490. So here for Q, I'll say equals our direct materials completed and transferred out, units times cost per EUP for 490. And we could technically drag this formula down so that it, I didn't do an absolute cell reference here. So if we want to drag this formula down, we need to make the reference to the cost per equivalent unit an absolute value. So I put the dollar signs in front of the row and the column. And so now it's absolute, which will allow us to drag that down. And so we have the cost accounted for, ending WIP, and that was our 500 units times 490 to give us 2,450. And then we can add those together for 13,230 total costs accounted for as far as direct materials go. Now for conversion, we're doing essentially that same thing. We're going to come back up to units completed and transferred out times the cost per EUP for conversion, make that an absolute cell reference. And so we have 8,140. We'll drag that down. And for ending WIP, we have 300 times 370 gave us 1,110. And I'll drag this formula, adding them together. So we have 9,250 total cost accounted for as far as conversion goes. For S and V, we're just summing across the row. So we'll add the direct materials and the conversion for completed and transferred out together. I'm going to pull that formula into section or spot V, which is just the sum across this row. And then we can do that same double check. They gave us 2,480 or 22,480. So we'll add together our 18,920 and 3,560, and that gives us 22,480. So that's a good sign. And then same thing, we can add across the row rather than down the column, and we get that same 22,480.